So, hello. Very happy to be here in person. My head is like a normal size versus last year it was that enormous thing on screen. What I'm going to do today is be very nerdy. I'm just basically going to go through a bunch of data, and then hopefully there'll be enough time I go for some Q&A. So I'll talk about where we are on work from home. I'm going to briefly talk about tips. As Liam and Danny said, this is going to be focused more on hybrid, because hybrid's the thing that people are really struggling with. And then finally, I'll talk about the future of work from home. So we have some survey data we just put out, which is like looking ahead. And I would say if you like work from home, it's very positive. So firstly, where are we? Well, if you read the media, you get the sense work from home is all over. So top left, Zoom announced, well, apparently Zoom announced it was ending work from home. This was the story that was put out back in September 2023. It's not at all. I actually know Zoom. I've met with Eric Yuan. I was there about a month ago. Their structure is people in engineering come in Monday, Wednesday. Folks in sales come in Tuesday, Thursday. Friday, the office is closed. So, the Zoom, the headlines are very misleading. Amazon, on the other hand, was, a truthful plan. They were aiming to end all work from home. The start date was apparently January 2025. For those of you that have been following what's going on, it's had mixed success. Some people are back. I've talked to other people in Amazon that said there's no desks, there's not enough space. My boss is basically ignoring it. They're letting me work from home 2-3 days a week. Amazon's a bit of an outlier. The main motivation for that appears to be to reduce headcount. So I'll come back later on this. The big thing to point out in Amazon as well is nobody else has copied it. So they pushed for the end of RTO, work from home, and the RTO moved back in September 2024. We have not seen any major other private sector companies copy it. Finally, we have the federal government. We know that Musk, Trump, etc., pushed for the end of work from home about a couple of months ago. Again, when I ask people how many firms think the federal government is a place to copy your management practices from, there's normally enormous silence. So I don't think that's going to set the trend. The question is, why are they doing it? Again, they're very similar, I think, to Amazon. They're doing it because they want people to drop out. Their view is, look, we want people to quit. It's like not obvious why they picked on work from home. You could have done stuff like turn the air conditioning very cold or very hot. You could have closed the toilets, infested the office with flies. Anything that's going to make people quit. For some reason, they picked on work from home. So what does the data look like? I'll show you 3 charts. I put something out on LinkedIn recently, but I'll just go through and explain these carefully. So one way to measure it, this is US data I'll start with, and I'll move a bit to international data. So one is just to measure from surveys the number of Americans that say they're working full-time, full-paid days from home. We survey about 8,000 Americans a month. That's the blue data. The US Census surveys about 40,000 a month. That's the red data. What can you see? You can see before the pandemic, it's about 7% of days. So folks did work from home, but it's kind of rare, basically on average once a month. And that was actually a few fully remote and very sporadic people doing hybrid. Height of the pandemic, 60%, more than half of working days were at home because of the lockdown. It dropped down. People kind of extrapolate and think that drop kept happening. You can notice most critically here, it's basically been flat. So our most recent month, this is January, February, March. It's March 20. We're about to put out the April data. You can see if you look at March 2025, it's extremely similar to March 2023. There has just not been any change. And it's one of these weird conversations. I keep saying, yes, exactly, like over and over again. It's like, this thing has stabilized. People say, well, why does it seem like the media is full of stories at the end of work from home? The reason is, and I talk to a lot of journalists, I don't want to beat up on them, but they have an incentive to write pieces that people click on, that comment, that circulate, because they're incentivized in a number of visits to that story. If you write a story saying, work from home is going to stay for another year, people are kind of moderately interested. If you write a story saying company X, Goliath National Bank has banned work from home, people are furiously clicking on it and commenting it and sending it around on LinkedIn. So my one piece of advice is please never click on those articles. Click on the ones that talk about work from home is here to stay. Comment, like them, just don't read the ones about ending it. But that's why the data seems disconnected from what we read. So survey 2, you'll know this too. This is Castle data. This is almost exactly the inverse of days work from home. And it shows the same thing. So it's benchmarked to 100% being Feb 2020. Hardly anyone was going to the office during the peak of the lockdown. This is probably support staff, IT, essential service workers. It's rising, rising, rising. again, you can see it's basically flat. So, oh, this thing is moving. I didn't, so I hope it doesn't come off, but okay. So you can see it's basically flat. Yes, there is some variation. If you look, Austin has somewhat higher office occupancy than San Francisco, but all of these cities are flat. So this is 2,600 buildings across the US. It's a pretty large, accurate database. So this is, sample 2. Imagine you don't trust either of these. People often complain about issues with cars, so they may complain about our survey. Third data set is from Placer AI, and it tracks cell phones. And the nice thing about cell phones is, certainly for Americans, they are never far from our bodies. Like very few, I'd be interested if anyone has their cell phone more than 6 foot from them. It's like probably nobody. I'm sure almost everyone has it in their pocket or in their bag or nearby. So if you can track a phone, you can track a person. And this is from, 700 buildings. It's almost exactly the same. So this is 700 office buildings. It excludes any building with more than 1 floor of non-office. So if you have Starbucks on the ground floor, that's okay. But if it's like a hotel or mixed use, they take it out. You can see again, drop, rise, 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 and it's been flat since mid-2023. So just to be very clear, work from home has been stable for the last 2 years. It is not increasing, it is not decreasing. So please, don't believe any media narratives on it. It's not the media trying to push a story. They just, individual journalists have an incentive to write stories that people click on. So why is this? The reason is it's just phenomenally profitable. So fully remote clearly has some major upsides in terms of A, you don't have to spend on space, and B, you have a dramatically larger labor market. So I have a paper actually I'm about to put out, which is looking at a Turkish call center, and they went to fully remote, and what you see is they had a very sharp increase in people hired from rural areas, women, people with young kids. As a result, the share of their employees that have that were graduates and experience went up sharply, and their productivity went up about 10%. So fully remote, you can easily justify in terms of bigger labor market, you save in office costs. Hybrid, this study is probably the most relevant thing to hybrid, and I'm endlessly talking to companies and execs saying, look, the reason you should do this is it's very profitable. So I don't explain what this paper in Nature is about. So this is a paper we put out last year. It's with 2 co-authors, Robin Hang and James Liang. James is was the founding CEO, now chairman of a company called Trip.com. The current CEO, Jane Sun, she worked with us to do a large randomized control trial. So Trip are a publicly listed, they're worth about $50 billion on NASDAQ, big travel multinational. And they're very interested on how hybrid would affect their employees. So they decided to do an A/B test. So what they did, took 1,600 people that are graduates, they're pretty much like folks here. They are in accounting, finance, marketing, and computer engineering, as in coding. They all have a degree, a third of them have a master's degree. So this is a very elite, innovation, culture-focused audience. It's not call centers, so this is a kind of high-end group. And they A/B tested. So James actually drew a ping pong ball out of an urn, and it said odd. And what that meant is if you had an odd birthday, you're born on the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th of the month, like I'm May the 5th, you got to work from home on Wednesday, Friday. If you had an even birthday, 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th of the month, you had to come in for all 5 days. So this is a vast A/B test. We know tech firms are endlessly A/B testing. So if you go to Facebook or Google or Instagram, they're endlessly randomizing what you see. Well, this is doing it on management practices. So they held this for 6 months. They then collected another 18 months of data to have a 2-year window. So what did we find? 2 things. First thing, there was no impact on performance at all. So the folks coming in 3 days had exactly the same performance reviews, promotion rates, innovation scores, leadership scores, lines of code written, whatever metric you want to look at, they did exactly the same as the folks coming in 5 days. Why is that? When we interviewed the company, they said, look, for this group, you should think these are typically late 20s-somethings, coders or people in marketing. There's some benefit of coming in. They said that it's helpful for mentoring, for building culture, for innovating. But by the time you've come in for 3 days a week, that benefit starts to wear thin. And they said there's some big benefit from working from home. One is it's quieter, so it's a lot easier to concentrate on deep work. And 2, they're saving about an hour and a half a day commute, so they're less tired, they're sleeping more, they're actually working more minutes when they're at home. And so, on average, fact 1, there is no impact on performance. It's not better, it's not worse. Productivity, performance, whatever you want to call it, was flat. Fact 2 is quit rates dropped by 35%. And this is critical because quits cost this company, they reckon, about $50,000 per quit. They said, they said if somebody quits, you have to go out, re-advertise, re-interview, train, get them up to speed. It takes manager time, it takes HR time, it's expensive. Tripp's estimate was moving to hybrid made them about $20 million more profit a year. So one big message for me, if you're trying to persuade an exec, a manager, a CEO, a CHRO to support hybrid, is it's actually highly profitable for businesses. Why? Well, they often ask, how does it affect productivity? I actually think that's the wrong question. I think it should be, how does it affect profitability? And if you look at profitability, it's extremely profitable. As a result, 80% of Fortune 500 have some hybrid or remote workers. So this is normal. I'm aware that JP Morgan is trying to force some folks, we were talking over dinner last night, they said, 10% of their employees. If Jamie Dimon said this, amazing, 10% of their employees are fully remote. So pretty much all big firms have this. Why? Because it's hugely profitable. So what does it look like? Again, I get asked a lot, what about the mix? About 10% of folks in the US are fully remote. They tend to be the most kind of mixed group. There's some very low-paid people. Think of call centers, data entry, HR. Stanford University, we have 20,000 employees. 10% of our employees are fully remote. Who are they? Well, I was processing a research grant the other day, doing the numbers and the accounts, and the person I was emailing back and forwards embassy with him, and I said, where are you? And he said, Illinois. And I was like, okay, we're in California. I was like, how often do you come to campus? And he's like, I never do, I'm fully remote. And he's been great. So, we have 2,000 people that are doing a lot of support, some high-end coders. I know there's folks from Airbnb here, folks from Allstate. There's a bunch of people that are, low and highly paid in this group. Hybrid tends to be grads. If I think of my Stanford undergrads, MBAs, many of them end up here. And then there's fully on-site, it's about 60% frontline employees. They tend to be the lowest paid group. So again, there's a mix. If you look at large companies, pretty much all big companies have a mix of all three. How does this vary by industry? So tech, information at the top, you notice that the most common employee work pattern in tech is now hybrid. So the average person in tech is hybrid. There's about as many fully remote tech workers there are fully in person. So this tells you how much tech has embraced work from home. Finance and insurance is pretty similar. You go down to the bottom end, not surprisingly, hospitality, food services, most people are in person. Who are these guys? This is typically head office staff. Who are these people? This is typically support staff. So I actually was at an event in Las Vegas a year ago, and a guy came up to me afterwards and said, I run a chain of taco restaurants down in LA, and I love work from home. And I was kind of thinking, that doesn't sound, I was trying to figure out what he was going to say next. And he said, and I didn't say anything. He said, I have, all the people that cook, that clean, that serve food have to come in 5 days a week. They cannot work from home, or 6, whatever their shift is. He said, but my back office, I've moved them to fully remote. And he said, it's dramatically cheaper. It's like 30, 40% cheaper. And I'm incredibly happy, and I'm permanently there. So this would be where these folks are here. Here's international data to kind of pan out. So this data is harder to collect. We've run 3 waves of this. It's expensive. It costs a couple of $100,000 each time we run a survey. You can see at the top English-speaking countries, so the UK, US, Canada, Australia, tend to have the highest levels of work from home. Europe is not far behind. Northern Europe's a bit higher than Southern Europe. Latin America, to the extent we have African data, is lower. The continent's a little bit of an outlier is Asia. So Asia tends to have the lowest levels of work from home. In the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about it. I think it's a massive policy mistake, actually. When I talk to Asian policymakers in particular, I'm like, this is an area you could dramatically improve quality of life for your population. These are very big, dense, expensive cities. People are commuting for long distances. Supporting hybrid would be great. It also looks like it supports fertility, and this is an area of the world where they have really serious fertility issues. So, this is where it is now. My guess is running it 10 years forward, Asia's where the big upside is. We've run this survey now 3 times. What does the level look like? So this is work from home is stabilizing globally. 2022, we saw 1.6 days on average on the same sample. There's, I think, 22 countries we surveyed all 3 waves. You notice the last 2 waves, it's basically stable. So I've shown you a lot of very detailed US data, but globally it looks like work from home is here to stay. So fact 1 is, it looks like it's permanent. What about managing it? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there's many people here that have much better expertise on this than me. I'll just point out two things that come up over and over and over again when I talk to companies and organizations about it. So before I do that, one challenge is I don't need another mic. No, okay, fine. So one challenge is there's enormous variation in what people want. So about 20% of people at the top want to come in every day. They never want to work from home. Who are they? When I poll my undergrads at Stanford, most of them sit in that camp. You should imagine who we're talking about. We're talking about like 20-year-olds. They say, look, when I start my first job, I want to go in every day because it's social, I want to get mentored. Like, where am I going to work from home? I'm in an apartment with 5 other people. I don't want to work in my bedroom. Like, where am I going to go? So there's that group. They tend to be honest, 20-somethings or people kind of empty nesters, 50, 55 plus. At the other extreme, there's folks that want to work from home 5 days a week. If you look in the data, there's a lot of people here in their 30s and 40s with kids. So these are people who are much more experienced in their career. They have a very active life outside work. They don't want to go in. They don't feel like they need to go in at all. And then probably the biggest group is hybrid of various shapes and forms. But for, fact one, if you're any large company, for example, think of Apple. I don't know if you remember those petitions towards Tim Cook. Apple had 150,000 employees and 1,000 people signed saying they wanted to work from home more than 2 days a week. Looking at this data, it's like 1,000. There's probably 50,000, 100,000 people in Apple that want more than 2 days, but there's 1,000. So it's very hard. So with that in mind, what are the two things I do? One is coordination. So we ask people on the left, why do you like to work from home? This is a very easy question to answer. It's like no commute, saving money, flexible schedule. People can very quickly tell you why they love working from home. That's not difficult. On the other side, we said, why do you want to come into the office? Remember, I just shown you that at least 70% of people want to come into the office 1 day a week. Why do they say that? That by far the most common things are socializing and face-to-face collaboration. Notice time with my manager is right down here. And there's another option, which is like free food and drink. It doesn't even make the list. Like nobody's commuting 40 minutes each way to get a free bagel or a slice of pizza. So the big thing here is, if you're going to have folks come into the office, you want to coordinate on the same days. It really doesn't make any sense to have people on different days. My favorite anecdote is a friend of mine in London. She's in a big law firm that requires you to come in 2 days a week. And I asked her, I was like, which days do you come in? And she said, I come in Monday and Friday. And I was like, that's kind of unusual. I was like, why? And I thought she was going to say something about traffic or the shorter lines in the sandwich shop. She said, oh, I don't like my colleagues. And I was like, okay, well, in that case, probably, I don't know, it didn't seem like that was a great solution. She said, to be honest, if I could come in on the weekend, I would, but, So I think fact one is coordination. How to do that? If you have a hybrid plan, depends on what your plan is. Look, if you're fully remote, this is irrelevant. If you have a hybrid plan, like, for example, in the economics department where I work, the department manager, their whole plan is 2 days a week. They coordinate on 2 days a week and come in on the same 2 days. I think it actually makes sense to kind of enforce that properly on the days you come in. Why? Because there's a spillover. Imagine, I can look at Sophie, imagine there's 5 of us, the front row is our team, and I don't come in. And we're having a meeting, everyone else then has to like get on Zoom when they're in the office to connect me, and they kind of feel irritated, like, why did I come in to be on Zoom? So I think first thing is, if you pick days, make sure people come in. The second thing is pick a sensible plan. A sensible plan is an enforceable plan. There's an old saying that goes back to Roman times, which is a good law is an enforceable law. So to give you an anecdote, I was up in Washington, D.C. about 6 months ago, and I visited in quick succession the IMF and the World Bank to talk to them about this. The IMF, who probably to most people, they don't, the IMF and the World Bank are very similar organizations. Their headquarters are a couple of streets away. IMF has you come in 2 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday. They enforce that. People come in, they seem fine with it. They're like, we're coming in for 2 days. When we come in, people are there, it's connected, there's lunches, there's events that make sense to do it. I'm not on, not on Zoom on those 2 days. The World Bank asks you to come in 4 days a week, which seems excessive, but doesn't seem to enforce or coordinate. What happened, people said they typically, in talking to HR, were swiping in typically 2 or 3 days a week, but it was like all over the place. And when you talk to employees, they were just pissed off with it. They said, it doesn't work. It's like, I feel like I should be in more. When I'm in, half the office is empty. It's really disconnected. So that was a big issue. So thing is, one is coordination. The other is just performance reviews. So, yeah, I can see Phil here. It's hard to avoid because he's so tall, but I have Phil, and he's my manager. When I'm in the office, he can kind of watch when I'm there. In fact, this point came up from Marissa Mayer. I interviewed her. If you remember, she banned work from home, and I asked her what happened. It's a kind of long story, and I think, well, what she did in hindsight, I can talk about it afterwards. It's a long, complicated, so it wasn't as bad, but she got mangled through the media. I think her PR department was the problem. But she said, look, when people in the office, you can see whether they're working well, are they typing on their computer. When I walk by, I can see what's on the screen. Is it, Python, Excel, Word, or are they watching Champions League or something they shouldn't be doing? She said, I can do managing by walking around. That's kind of a 5 out of 10. It's not a particularly great way to manage people, but it's livable. She said, if you're fully remote, I have no idea what you're doing. And so if folks are fully remote, you need to have some way to performance manage them. So if Phil is my boss, then for me, my performance would be teaching, would be research, would be university service. He needs some way to evaluate what I'm doing. For him, it's a lot easier because he doesn't have to breathe down my neck all the time to check what I'm doing. For me, it's a lot easier because if I want to pick my kids up from school or go to the gym or go for a walk, I can do that without worrying that Phil's saying, like, why is Nick not replying to emails really quickly? So the other thing is performance reviews. This is always a good practice pre-pandemic, but when you talk to companies, if you don't have good performance review systems, it's harder to have work from home. So finally, what about the future? So about 2 months ago, we surveyed 440 US firms. We did this with the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank. So this is part of the Fed system. These are across the country, small, large, medium, different industries. So it's a pretty representative sample. Question 1, we asked them, during the next 12 months, is your firm planning a return to office mandate for those employees who currently work in hybrid or fully remote? And then we asked them how many days you're requesting them to return to office. Bear in mind, RTOs don't typically mean 5 days. Often they're like an extra day. So people kind of misunderstand. It's that mostly they're not 5 days. They're mostly an extra day. What we've done here is charted the distribution of firms under their current plan, because we know what they currently did in February 2025, and under what they said would be their mandate a year from now if they had one. And if firms have no mandates, we put their current values in. So first thing is, they look the same. They basically, most people are like, wait, haven't you just plotted the same data twice? No, but the numbers are incredibly similar. So the bottom line from this is, on average, looking a year ahead, the predicted change is basically 0. So why is that? It's not because nobody's having RTO mandates. It's because there's about as many firms expanding work from home as contracting it. What is going on? Well, there are some companies having RTO mandates, absolutely. So there are some companies pulling people back. But there's about as many companies who are, say, office leases expiring, saying now's a good time to add an extra day to work from home because we can downsize space, or are struggling to hire. So this shows you the change in work from home between Feb 25 and November 24, when we did an earlier survey, almost 6 months earlier. Most firms don't change. Some are increasing work from home, some are reducing it, but the average is basically 0. So the reason, the media always tends to report these, it completely ignores these guys, but they're both there in the data. So that's fact 1. Question 2 was, what happens is the recession? So we said, what would your firm do if unemployment were to double? So we called it, what happens if we titled the question about a recession. Unemployment doubling is basically a pretty major recession. I don't know if you saw today, the GDP numbers are not great, but unemployment is definitely not doubled, so it's a bad downturn. The answer is, there is a little bit of increase in in-person time, a bit of reduction in work from home, but it's very small. If you look at these numbers, it is very, very small change. So, looking 1 year ahead, I think I can pretty confidently say there is likely to be no major change, even if there's a recession. This is kind of worst case scenario. Most firms are not planning to do anything. Why? Because it's cost efficient to have folks in hybrid and remote, and if there's a recession, you care about cutting costs. So there's no business case particularly to call people back into the office if there's a recession. LinkedIn seems to agree. This is an example of probably non-random sampling. So I wasn't kind of pushing this, but I would sometimes pick up, attack non-random sample surveys. So this is definitely one. But so finally, what about the longer run? I think in the long run, work from home is likely to increase. So to argue this, I'm going to end with historical data. This is data on levels of work from home in the US going back to 65. You can see this thing has been on a pretty steady increase. on the Y scale here is in logs. Sorry, is a log scale, which means a straight line is a kind of constant growth rate. So this is saying work from home has been growing at a pretty steady pace for the last 50, 60 years. It's roughly doubling every 15 years from a very low level. Why? It's basically all technology. So I'm one of 4 kids. Both my parents worked, but I remember when one of us was sick or the London Underground stopped or there was bad weather, we may not be able to go in, and one of my mum or dad would work from home. And I actually talked to both of them a bunch about it. And my mum said, look, in the 80s, working from home was terrible. It was like there was, carrying piles of paper home. Phone calls were really expensive. It was really, you felt disconnected. It wasn't great. When I, took a day off, it was really like you were suffering in terms of work-wise. She said in the 90s, we got one of those Amstrad green screen personal computers that we had at home. So that was a lot better. And then in the 2000s, you had laptops, you had the internet. 2010s, you have, video calls, cloud, etc. Technology is getting better. If you were to predict this thing out, it's pretty obvious that technology is continuing to improve. We see over there, there's Jabra with their hardware and Rome and many other companies with their software. It is dramatically improving. I've also in Silicon Valley visited all kinds of amazing things, like Google has this Starliner, this kind of 3D screen, and I visited Nora that has the huge portal thing. There's some incredible stuff coming. So if I'm to predict 5, certainly 10 years out, it seems a really easy prediction that work from home levels are actually going to be up because the technology will get better. The other thing to note is the average length of office leases in the US is 12 years. So there's a lot of leases expiring now that folks signed in 2015 and that decide that they want to downsize. So to end, work from home is very much here to stay. Looking back the last 2 years, it's been flat. Looking ahead the next year, it's going to be flat. Looking 5 to 10 years out, it's going to be rising. I just think it's hard. So the second point is the bit that's overlooked. And please, if you see a story about working from home here to stay, click on it, comment many times, read it, unread it, read it, unread it. If you see one about end of work from home, just delete it or just don't open it. Okay.